All right. I think we're doing this differently tonight. Against all odds, let me turn this. We will be recording this at a different angle, but we'll get it done. Judy, is that right side up or sideways? I'm right side up. Look at that. All right, let me adjust this down just a little bit. I am so sorry, guys. This is what you call live video. All right. All right, so I know it's a totally different format, but here we go. Last week we were in Galatians, and we talked about a couple of things. And one of them was Paul's what Paul did in the last chapter, which was really quite profound when you consider that Paul rebuked Peter, James, and John. He also rebuked Barnabas, his own cohort, and he rebuked all of the Jews that were listening to Peter, James, and John. Now, he rebuked them and said that they were not walking uprightly according to truth. Now, get that. Isn't that amazing that Peter, James, and John were not walking uprightly according to truth? So now he's addressing these Jewish Galatians as he was in the first chapter, and he continues, he said, I'm justified by the faith of Christ. You see, that was what Paul's big disruptive doctrine was that caused the apostles to fall out of favor with him, or he with the apostles. This was the rub. Here it is, right here in black and white. Now, what was not walking uprightly according to truth? Well, that's what is addressed in chapter 2. There's two things that Paul addresses. Now, in the Christian community for generations, it has been taught that Paul was pointing out the right way as opposed to the wrong way. But Paul, what he's doing is pointing out the wrong way to things that are being taught by the disciples that are just wrong. They are just wrong. And he is already established that in chapter 1. They're teaching things that are not truth. They are teaching things that are not truth. They are teaching things that are not truth. And then he said that he rebuked them, of course, for this, and rebuked them openly. Rebuked Peter openly before them all. Then chapter 3 says, "O foolish Galatians." Now remember, he said, I don't frustrate the grace of God. Let's recap that just a moment. Remember, you don't want to be frustrating the grace of God by following the teachings of Peter, James, and John. Paul said, I don't do that. I don't do what? I don't do what those guys are doing. What are they doing? They are not walking uprightly according to truth. If they were, they, like myself, would not be frustrating the grace of God. Then he says to the Galatians, to the people at large, "O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you?" Now, isn't that something? To talk about this facetious Paul. He tells you who the problem is. He tells you what the problem is, and then asks who has bewitched you after telling them who it was. Who has bewitched you that you should not obey or follow the truth, before whose eyes Jesus Christ hath been evidently set forth, crucified among you? How did you get so wrapped up in this doctrine that they're teaching? Because it's not the disciples who started their ministry after it and were called by God also. But following their teaching, Paul is saying that they were teaching this all wrong. That's not my opinion. That's Paul's teaching, that they were teaching this all wrong. He said, "This only would I learn of you. Received ye the Spirit by the works of the law, or by the hearing of faith?" Now, I know how you've heard that read, but I'm going to show you that Paul is disqualifying both of these as the way of not walking uprightly according to the truth. He said, this only would I learn of you. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law? And see, the way you heard it read is, did you receive it by the works of the law or the right way, by the hearing of faith? Now, I want you to consider just a moment, he's pointing out two wrong ways here. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? You see, these were the two doctrines that were spreading wildly and caught on and created what we now know as Christianity. Obedience to the law and personal faith. This is what caught on. And he says, this is the only thing I want to learn from you. He said, I want to find out if you did this by your faith and if you did this by the works of the law. Now, that's the only thing I want to know from Christianity. I don't care whether it's Methodist, Presbyterian, Pentecostal, Mormon, which one it is. I only want to know the same thing Paul wanted to know. Are we redeemed by our own faith? Are we redeemed by the works of the law? You see, you being redeemed by your own faith is as foolish as being redeemed by the works of the law. Show us where we have faith. Show me somebody. I mean, we can't move, we can't turn a lead pencil over from one side to the other using our faith. Jesus said faith would move mountains. Jesus didn't say that to explain faith. He said it to explain you ain't got it. Faith would move mountains. It would cause a mountain to jump up out of the ground and go flying through the air across East Tennessee, North Carolina. These big North Carolina mountains and Tennessee mountains would go flying into the sea. That's what Jesus was trying to say. You don't have it. And that's what Paul is challenging here, is this doctrine that was saying you've got to keep the law and it is by your faith. He says, have you suffered so many, verse 3. Are you so foolish, having begun in the Spirit, are you now made perfect by the flesh? You see, the law, keeping the law and personal faith is of the flesh. Both are of the flesh. He says, he therefore that ministereth the Spirit among you. Now, who is he that ministers the Spirit? This isn't the local preacher. This isn't the visiting evangelist. There's only one who has ministered the Spirit unto us, and that's God himself. He that ministereth the Spirit and worketh miracles among you. All these dudes on TV aren't miracle workers, folks. I've been around them. I used to be one of the catchers for Benny Hinn in one of his very first meetings. There was several claims of healings in that meeting, and I can tell you there were none. I was there. And I passed all the claims. I could tell you some really funny, sad stories that came out of that meeting. In fact, up in Toronto, Canada, many, many years ago, probably more than 30. Yes, more than 30. He says, he therefore that ministers the Spirit to you. Now remember, we're talking about God. And ministers the Spirit and works miracles among you. Doeth he it by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Did God have to keep the law to do miracles? Who's done all the miracle working? It's God. Did God have to keep a law to do miracles? Did God have to keep the law to give the Spirit? God didn't have to keep a law, and God didn't have to do any of this to keep the law or anything. God didn't have to do anything except be God. He says, in verse 6, even as Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him for righteousness. Know ye therefore that they that are of faith, the same are the children of Abraham. Now here we got a little loop-de-loo that Paul takes us through. Now remember that anything that is of faith, he doesn't say everything that has faith. He said everything that is of faith is of Abraham. Now I have to take you over to verse 16 really quickly, because this is where Paul clarifies this, and we're not going to try to read through the whole thing tonight. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He saith not, and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ. You see, there is no Jew on this earth that was of the seed of Abraham. Not a single one. Abraham is not the father of the Jews. Abraham is not the father of Islam. He's not the father of either one, because the promise went to Abraham and his seed. I know that's what some people want to do to me right now. The promise went from God to Abraham to his seed, which was Christ. All right, now keep that in. Remember Paul also said there's one Lord, one God, one faith, one baptism, one Lord and God and Father of us all. All right, of us all. Now, you see, there is a damnable doctrine that has spread throughout the Christian community, and that is you've got to have personal faith. You've got to believe yourself. Now, that just is not true. That's what Paul is refuting. When he says here, did you receive the works through the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? You see, we can go to Romans chapter 10, verse 17. Paul made that statement again, for faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word. He's still in the book of Romans challenging this doctrine and says, but did they not all hear? Something's wrong with the doctrine. So Paul is challenging not only the works of the law, but also the hearing of faith, the use of personal faith to receive redemption or salvation from God. Because God didn't need these things to redeem anybody or to do the miraculous. Know ye therefore that they which are of faith, the same are the children of Abraham. So now, wait a minute. Only Jesus was appointed as heir of the righteousness of God. That's what the blessing of Abraham is. It's the righteousness of God. That's what is explained here in this chapter. So the righteousness that is by faith or of faith came through Abraham to Christ, the single seed. Do you get it? There's not a religious group on this earth that are the descendants and the seed of Abraham, except for in Christ, everybody, the entire planet. And this is what Paul continues here to explain. Know ye therefore that they which are of faith, the same are the children of Abraham. You see, I am of Williams. I didn't do anything to become of Williams. I just am of Williams. The same way as being of Abraham now is of faith. But it's the faith of Christ through the faith of Abraham. And now comes out on this side of the wash and says in verse 8, and the scriptures foreseeing that God would justify the heathen through faith, but not yours. You see, just back in verse 20, Paul said we're justified by the faith of Christ. We're out of faith. We're not in faith. The faith is, we are of the faith of Christ. He says, and the scripture foreseeing that God would justify the heathen through faith, preached before the gospel unto Abraham, saying, now how could he preach the gospel to Abraham hundreds of years before Christ? One single line is all we got. In thee shall all nations be blessed. Wow. Wait a minute. Now there was only one seed that came out of Abraham, and that was Christ. There are no descendants of Abraham through Abraham. Abraham only had one descendant of the inheritor of the promise of righteousness, and that was Christ. Only one, not as of seeds, as of many, but as to the seed, which is Christ. That's verse 16 later on in this chapter. He says, In thee shall all be blessed. That's the gospel. In thee shall all be blessed. What was in him? Christ. What came out of him? Christ. What came out of Christ? Everyone. Wow. So then they which be of faith, not have their own faith, those that are of faith are blessed with faithful Abraham. My goodness. I hope you're as impressed as I am. This is good news, folks. You are of faith. Everything that came out of Christ is of faith. And what came out of Christ is everything that went into Christ. You see, for something to come out of a seed, we are of the seed, out of the seed. Everything that comes out of the seed had to be in the seed before the seed dies. And guess what Paul taught in Ephesians? That Christ took into himself the seed, all Jews, all Gentiles. It's the only two groups God recognized as human beings on this planet at that time. And guess what had to come out of Christ? The seed. It had to be what went into the seed has to come out of the seed. The seed don't lie. The seed don't lie. The seed don't lie. Stop walking like Peter, James, and John and not being upright according to truth and going around telling people they've got to keep the law and they've got to believe. Stop it. Just stop it. Oh man, it's nice to be redeemed. It's nice to know it didn't take my faith to do it. Because you know what? I can't, this pen is completely round. If I lay it on the table, I can't make this pen roll over one single time, not even move a quarter of an inch with my faith. Jesus said faith would move mountains. Either you don't have any or you do. If you got any, you could move mountains. And Jesus took the mountain, which was the law, and threw it into the sea. It's gone. That mountain has been removed. I hope you've enjoyed this. Pardon the several attempts to start. Pardon our different format here. I don't know what it's going to look like. But Judy told me I'm right side up. So I'm walking uprightly now according to truth. I'm even upright according to the camera right now. All right, I love you guys. Ruminate on this. Think on it. Don't get mixed up. Don't let anybody tell you that it's your faith and then you have to live the rest of your life wondering if you truly have faith, because you don't. Oh man, that's such a comfort to my heart. I don't have what it takes. I've been redeemed by the faith of the Son of God.